Emma Harris wiped dust from the leather-bound album, her fingers leaving trails on its cracked surface. Rain tapped against the windows of the Massachusetts Historical Society's archive room, casting a gray pall over the stacks of boxes. 3 weeks into her sabbatical research on Depression-era family structures, and she'd found little of note until now. Where did this come from? She asked the archivist, lifting the heavy album. Donation last month. Family cleaning out an attic in Salem. Nobody's cataloged it yet, the elderly man replied, adjusting his glasses. Figured it might interest you. The album's first page showed a handsome couple standing before a white Victorian house with intricate gingerbread trim, a brass plate affixed to the page reading, "The Wilson Family, 1932." The man wore a banker's suit. The woman, a modest dress, both smiling stiffly at the camera. 3 children arranged by height stood before them, wearing their Sunday best. Emma turned the page and frowned. The same family appeared in the next photograph, but something seemed different. She pulled her magnifying glass from her bag, studying the image. The children's expressions were tense, unnatural. The mother's hand gripped the smallest child's shoulder with visible pressure, fingertips white against the fabric. Behind them stood the house again, but Emma noticed a window on the 3rd floor that appeared to be boarded up from the inside. She flipped through more pages. Family picnics, holiday gatherings, beach outings, all perfectly ordinary except for the unchanging. Rigid smiles and eyes that never seemed to crinkle with genuine joy. On the last page, she found something odd. A newspaper clipping dated October 1934. Local. Banker relocates family west after tragic accident. The article mentioned only 4 family members. Emma counted the people in the first photograph. Again, 5. She checked the final family portrait from 1934. 4. The youngest child had disappeared from both the photographs and the public record with no explanation. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the archive's air conditioning. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "What happened to the Wilson child?" Below it, she added, "Elizabeth, missing from records after spring 1934. As she closed the album, a small envelope slipped from between the final pages. Inside was a single lock of dark hair tied with faded blue ribbon. Emma's request for additional Wilson family records yielded a small trove. Property deeds, tax documents, school registrations, and church membership rolls. She spread them across her hotel room desk, organizing them chronologically while rain continued to drum against the windows of her small Salem hotel. Thomas Wilson had arrived in the coastal town of Harborview in 1929, just before the market crash. Curiously, he maintained his position at First Regional Bank, while others lost everything. The 1930 census listed him as bank manager, but by 1932, documents referred to him as proprietor. His wife, Marion, was active in church affairs and ladies' auxiliaries. Their children, James, Catherine, and Elizabeth, were enrolled in local schools, Elizabeth the youngest. Emma circled the name, noting how it disappeared from school records after spring 1934. No transfer papers, no death certificate, nothing. Records showed James and Catherine continuing through school years, then James joining the military in 1941. Catherine married in 1943 and moved to Connecticut. The parents eventually relocated to California in 1946. The house in Harborview sold to a Dr. Preston. Emma picked up her phone and called her department colleague, Michael. "I need a favor," she said when he answered. "Can you check if Harborview still has local newspapers from the 1930s? I'm looking for anything on the Wilson family, especially around April to October 1934. Missing child case?" Michael asked. They'd worked together on historical genealogies before. "Maybe. Something's not adding up. I'll see what I can find. Harborview has a small historical society. Probably closed for the season, but I know someone there." Emma thanked him, then opened her laptop to search death records from Massachusetts in 1934. No Elizabeth Wilson listed. She expanded her search to neighboring states. Nothing. As night fell, Emma pulled out the town directory for Harborview. 1934. She found the Wilson entry, but something caught her eye. The address of Dr. William Preston, the town physician, was just 2 doors down from the Wilson home. A coincidence? Or something more? She made another note. Follow up on Preston connection. On her nightstand, the envelope with the lock of hair sat like an accusation. The white Victorian stood exactly as it had appeared in the photographs, though nearly a century of salt air had weathered its gingerbread trim and faded its once pristine paint to a dull cream. Emma parked across the street, studying the 3-story structure. The current owner had agreed to a brief tour after Emma explained her historical research. "It's just such a fascinating example of preserved Victorian architecture," she'd said on the phone, concealing her true interest. A middle-aged woman named Diane greeted Emma at the door. "My husband and I bought it 5 years ago. Been renovating ever since," she said, leading Emma inside. "These old places are money pits, but we couldn't resist the character." Emma nodded, eyes scanning the entryway with its original hardwood floors and sweeping staircase. The layout matched what she'd seen in the album photographs. "Has anything unusual turned up during renovations?" Emma asked casually. Hidden spaces or objects from previous owners? Diane laughed. Funny you should ask. The third floor was a complete mystery when we bought the place. The previous owners had it sealed off completely, said it had water damage, but when we finally opened it up, it was perfectly preserved, just dusty. Almost like a time capsule. Emma's pulse quickened. The third floor? Would that be where the window was? She caught herself. Where there's a dormer window facing the street? Yes, that's the nursery. Strangest thing about it, all the furniture was still there, covered in sheets. Children's toys from the 1930s, even clothes in the dresser. Diane led the way upstairs. My husband wanted to clear it out immediately, but I found it too interesting. Some historian you are, you'll probably appreciate that I cataloged everything before we renovated. They reached the third floor, and Diane pushed open a door to reveal a bright, modernized home office. This was the nursery. When we pulled up the old wallpaper, we found drawings underneath. Children's drawings, right on the plaster. Some were disturbing. My husband plastered over them immediately. Emma tried to keep her voice steady. Do you have photographs of the drawings? Diane hesitated. Yes, but they're not something I show people. The child who drew them was clearly troubled. Please, Emma said. It could be important for my research. Diane returned with a laptop, opening a folder labeled House Renovation, Third Floor. She clicked through images of the room being stripped down, revealing layers of history beneath modern additions. Here, she said, stopping at an image that made Emma catch her breath. Beneath peeling floral wallpaper were childish drawings and what appeared to be crayon or colored pencil, stick figures of a family. 4 tall figures surrounded one small one. In subsequent drawings, the small figure was shown separated from the others, then behind what looked like bars or in a box. The final image showed 4 figures standing above what appeared to be a hole in the ground. There were dates, Diane said quietly, written in the corner of each drawing. They spanned from January to April 1934. Emma's hand trembled as she made notes. Did you find anything else unusual in this room? Diane hesitated. Under the floorboards by the window, there was a tin box. Inside were some children's belongings, a small diary, hair ribbons, a broken doll. I kept them, thinking they might be historically valuable. She walked to a cabinet and retrieved a shoebox. It felt wrong to throw them away. Emma carefully examined the items, her historian's training warring with growing dread. The diary was small, its pages filled with the child's uneven handwriting. Most entries were mundane, but several from March 1934 caught her attention. Daddy says I'm not to go outside anymore. I've been bad. Mother says the doctor will make me better if I take the medicine. They locked my door again. I'm scared of the dark. The final entry, dated April 15th, 1934. Dr. Preston came again. I heard them talking about the basement. Emma closed the diary, her mind racing. The newspaper had mentioned a tragic accident in October, but Elizabeth had stopped writing in April. Is there access to the original basement? She asked. Diane nodded. It's mostly storage now, but the original foundation is intact. There's an unusual feature, a secondary room behind a false wall. The previous owners used it as a wine cellar, but it seemed purpose-built for something else. Would you mind if I see it? Emma asked, her academic curiosity now transformed into something more urgent. Of course, Diane replied, leading the way downstairs. Though I should warn you, it's the one place in the house that always feels uncomfortable. Emma's meeting with Harriet Johnson, the 93-year-old former town librarian, took place in the sunroom of the Harborview retirement home. Harriet's mind remained sharp despite her frail body, her eyes lighting up at the mention of local history. The Wilson family? Harriet repeated, setting aside her teacup. My goodness, that's a name I haven't heard in decades. They were prominent in town before they left. Thomas Wilson practically saved the bank during the Depression, though rumors circulated about his methods. And the children? Emma prompted gently, watching Harriet's expression closely. A shadow passed over the elderly woman's face. James was a few years ahead of me in school. Catherine was in my class. Quiet girl, never invited anyone to their home. Elizabeth was younger. Such a sweet child. Sickly, though. That's what they told everyone. Emma leaned forward. What happened to Elizabeth? Harriet's hands trembled slightly. The official story was tuberculosis. She was quarantined at home, then sent to a sanitarium. Never returned. She lowered her voice. But my father was the postmaster. Mail came through him. He told me Dr. Preston never sent any medical samples for testing, never requested records from any sanitarium. Do you think something else happened to her? Harriet glanced toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. An old habit from a lifetime in a small town. There were whispers. Marion Wilson had episodes. Thomas would call Dr. Preston whenever she became difficult. Elizabeth started showing similar behaviors, outbursts, talking back. In those days, defiant children were considered problematic, especially girls. What kind of doctor was Preston? Officially, the town physician. Unofficially, he had interests in new psychiatric treatments. He traveled to conferences in Europe, brought back ideas about controlling difficult behaviors. Harriet's voice dropped further. Some said he experimented. Nothing could be proven, of course. And the Wilsons left town shortly after Elizabeth disappeared. Harriet nodded. 6 months later, Marion seemed different, subdued. They sold to Preston, who kept the house until he died in 1963. His family sold it, and all his papers were destroyed in a fire at his office. Very convenient. As Emma thanked Harriet and prepared to leave, the old woman caught her wrist with surprising strength. There's a section of the old cemetery behind the pine grove. Unmarked graves from that period. Town records show one from April 1934. No name, just a number. Emma felt a chill. Thank you, Harriet. One last question. Do you know if there are any Wilson descendants still living? Catherine's daughter, Helen, moved back to the area about 10 years ago. Lives in the next town over. Never married, no children. Keeps to herself, Emma nodded, making a note of the name. The pieces were beginning to align into a disturbing picture. The beam of Emma's flashlight cut through the darkness of the basement's hidden chamber, revealing walls of fitted stone and a packed earth floor. Despite the summer heat outside, this space remained cold. The air heavy with the scent of damp soil and something else, an antiseptic smell that had lingered for decades. The previous owners found old medical supplies down here, Diane explained, standing at the entrance. Glass bottles, rubber tubing. We assumed it was from when Dr. Preston owned the place. Emma moved her light slowly across the walls, noticing iron rings embedded in the stone at intervals. Were these here when you bought the house? Diane nodded. My husband wanted to remove them, but they're set deep into the foundation. The contractor said it would compromise structural integrity. Emma approached one ring, examining the stone around it. There were scratch marks in the mortar, as if made by fingernails. She suppressed a shudder. In the corner, something caught her eye, a slight discoloration in the earth floor approximately 5 feet long and 2 feet wide. The soil there seemed more loosely packed than the surrounding ground. Has anyone ever excavated this section of the floor? She asked, keeping her voice neutral. No, we had no reason to. The inspector said the foundation was sound. Diane frowned. Well, why do you ask? Emma redirected. I'm just curious about original construction techniques. She took several photos of the space, then pointed to a small drain in the center of the room. Was this part of the original design? Yes, it connects to the old sewer system. The previous owners mentioned that Dr. Preston used this space for hydrotherapy treatments. Apparently that was fashionable in medical circles back then. Emma nodded, her historian's mind connecting the pieces. A soundproof stone room, restraint rings, drainage, medical supplies, and a doctor known for experimental psychiatric treatments. The picture forming was grim. As they prepared to leave, Emma's light caught something wedged between stones near the floor. A small, tarnished object. She knelt and carefully worked it free. A child's barrette, its blue enamel flower still visible beneath decades of grime. May I keep this? She asked Diane. For my research documentation. Diane agreed, but as they climbed the stairs back to the main house, Emma could feel the weight of the barrette in her pocket. A small, damning piece of evidence that Elizabeth Wilson had spent time in that room, far from the sanitarium her parents claimed had taken her. Morning fog clung to the weathered headstones of Harborview Cemetery, diffusing the early sunlight into a ghostly glow. Emma followed the narrow path behind the pine grove as Harriet had instructed, reaching a section separated from the main grounds by a low iron fence. The graves here were different, simple stone markers bearing only numbers, no names or dates. Emma counted 37 such markers, arranged in uneven rows. According to the cemetery map she'd obtained from the town clerk, this area was designated for indigent and unclaimed persons. She found marker number 27, dated April 18, 1934, just 3 days after Elizabeth's final diary entry. The stone was smaller than the others, roughly the size appropriate for a child. Emma placed her hand on the cold granite, a lump forming in her throat. Her research had led her to countless historical tragedies, but none had felt as immediate as this, a child's suffering, hidden by privilege and position, erased from public record but preserved in fragments of evidence that had survived nearly a century. You're interested in that section too? Emma startled at the voice behind her. A groundskeeper stood leaning on his rake, an elderly man with sun-weathered skin. Yes, she replied. For historical research, he nodded. Don't get many visitors to these graves, except that one lady who comes every April with flowers for number 27. Been coming for years, Emma's interest sharpened. Do you know who she is? Never asked her name. Elderly woman, walks with a cane now. Always leaves blue forget-me-nots. Said once they were her favorite. He shrugged. Thought maybe it was family, though these were supposed to be folks without family. When did you last see her? This April. Doubt she'll make many more visits, given her age. He resumed raking. Shame. Some stories get buried with the last person who remembers them. Emma thanked him and made her way back to her car, pulling out her notebook. Helen Mason, Catherine Wilson's daughter, would be in her late 70s now, the right age to be the mysterious visitor. And if Helen was bringing flowers to an unmarked grave, calling them her favorite, it suggested she knew the identity of the person buried there. The connection between living memory and historical record was growing stronger. Emma needed to speak with Helen, the last living link to the Wilson family secret. As she started her car, her phone chimed with a message from Michael. Found something in the medical examiner's archived records from 1934. You need to see this. Michael spread the photocopied documents across his office desk at the university. It took some doing to get these. They were misfiled under Preston rather than Wilson in the county archives. Emma scanned the pages, medical examiner's notes, a death certificate marked confidential, and correspondence between Dr. William Preston and a Dr. Heinrich Muller at a psychiatric hospital in Switzerland. Elizabeth Wilson, age 9, the death certificate read. Cause of death, cardiac arrest following hydrotherapeutic treatment for nervous disorder. They claimed she died during treatment, Emma said, but they never reported it officially. Michael nodded grimly. Preston classified it as a medical misadventure. The parents signed forms consenting to experimental treatment. Look at this. He pointed to a paragraph in Preston's notes. Subject exhibited extreme resistance to modified insulin therapy. Hydrostatic pressure was applied to subdue autonomic response. Cardiac failure occurred at 19 minutes of submersion. Parents have agreed to private interment to avoid public inquiry that might discourage future nervous patients from seeking necessary treatment. Emma felt sick. They drowned her during some kind of forced water therapy and covered it up. It gets worse, Michael said, handing her the letters. Preston was corresponding with Muller about using children for psychiatric experiments. Muller thanked him for valuable data on juvenile resistance thresholds and invited him to a conference in Zurich. Emma read between the lines of clinical language. Elizabeth had been used as a test subject for treatments that would now be considered torture, all with her parents' consent. The subsequent cover-up, a faked transfer to a sanitarium and a quiet exit from town, had protected both the doctor's reputation and the family's social standing. Why would parents allow this? Emma whispered. Michael shrugged sadly. Different era. Mentally ill children were considered defective, a family burden. Elizabeth's diary mentioned outbursts, defiance. In the 1930s, that could be labeled as moral insanity or hysteria. Parents desperate for a cure might trust a doctor's extreme methods. Emma gathered the documents. I need copies of all of this, and I need to find Helen Mason. Already located her, Michael said. She lives in a cottage on Cedar Point, about 20 minutes from Harborview. But Emma, he added cautiously, be gentle. If she's been putting flowers on that grave for years, she knows the truth, and has been carrying it alone. I'll be careful, Emma promised, but the historical record needs to be corrected. Elizabeth deserves that much. Helen Mason's cottage overlooked the same bay where the Wilson family had once posed for beach photographs. At 78, she retained the upright posture visible in her mother Catherine's images, though her hair had silvered and her face had softened with age. I wondered if someone would ever piece it together, she said, setting tea before Emma on the porch. Mother never spoke of Elizabeth directly, but sometimes when she'd had too much sherry, she'd talk about the terrible mistake and what they did to that poor child. Emma explained her research findings, watching Helen's face for reactions. The older woman remained composed, nodding occasionally. My grandmother Marion had what we now recognize as bipolar disorder, Helen said. When Elizabeth began showing similar symptoms, mood swings, defiance, my grandfather panicked. He'd built his banking career on projecting stability and control. A defective child threatened everything. So they turned to Dr. Preston, Emma said. Helen nodded. He promised revolutionary treatments from Europe. Mother remembered Elizabeth screaming when they took her to the basement room. After that, they told the other children she'd been sent away for her health. She paused, her teacup trembling slightly. Mother was 13. She knew something terrible had happened, but didn't learn the truth until she found letters after my grandfather died in 1952. Did she tell you everything then? Not until I was an adult. She carried the guilt her whole life, for not protecting her sister, for maintaining the family lie. Helen's eyes filled with tears. Mother started visiting the grave in the 1960s. When she became too ill to go, I continued for her. It seemed important that someone remember Elizabeth, acknowledge her existence. I want to include Elizabeth's story in my research, Emma said gently. To correct the historical record. Helen was silent for a long moment, then nodded. It's time. The shame doesn't belong to Elizabeth. It belongs to those who failed her. She rose and went inside, returning with a small wooden box. Mother saved these, the only proof Elizabeth existed beyond birth records. Inside were photographs that had been removed from the family album, a baby tooth tied with ribbon, and a small diary different from the one Emma had found. This was Catherine's diary, Helen explained. She recorded what she witnessed the night Elizabeth died. I think she always hoped someone would find it someday and understand. Snow fell gently on Harborview Cemetery as a small group gathered around the formerly unmarked grave. Emma stood beside Helen Mason, who leaned on her cane as the new headstone was unveiled. Elizabeth Ann Wilson, it read. January 12th, 1925, April 15th, 1934, remembered. At last, Emma's research had culminated in an academic paper that had drawn national attention. Medical, Experimentation and Family Complicity, The Covered-Up Death of Elizabeth Wilson. The article had prompted investigations into other unmarked graves in the indigent section, revealing 5 more children who had died under Dr. Preston's care between 1930 and 1942. The local historical society had created an exhibit on medical ethics featuring Elizabeth's story. The current owners of the Wilson house had allowed archaeological excavation of the basement room, where evidence confirmed Emma's theories about the treatments conducted there. As the small ceremony concluded, Helen placed blue forget-me-nots on the grave. Mother would be grateful, she told Emma. She wanted the truth known, but never found the courage to reveal it herself. Elizabeth's story has already changed how we approach historical research, Emma replied. We're now looking more critically at family records, questioning the absences and inconsistencies. They walked slowly back toward the cemetery gates, past the other newly marked graves of Preston's victims. Will you continue this kind of research? Helen asked. Emma nodded. There are thousands of similar cases, inconvenient family members who disappeared from records, medical abuses justified as treatments, communities that maintain silence. Each deserves the same attention we've given Elizabeth. At the gate, Emma paused for one last look at the small headstone, now properly identifying the child who had been erased from history. The academic in her had corrected the historical record, but the human in her had done something more important, restored dignity to a forgotten child and healing to those who still carried the weight of her story. In the distance, the Wilson house stood against the gray winter sky, its secrets exposed at last to the healing power of truth. Criei uma história em 10 capítulos, cada com aproximadamente 350 palavras, seguindo a sua solicitação. A narrativa se passa nos Queer e segue o título Historians. Studied this family and found a gruesome discovery. A história acompanha a professora Emma Harris, que descobre um álbum de fotografias de uma família dos anos 1930 e percebe que algo está errado quando uma criança desaparece dos registros. Sua investigação revela um caso chocante de experimentação médica antiética, encobrimento familiar e abuso infantil, tudo dentro do contexto histórico real da época. Os capítulos seguem uma progressão lógica, começando com a descoberta do álbum, seguindo pelas investigações dos registros, visitas à casa da família, entrevistas com pessoas que conheceram os Wilson, até a descoberta da terrível verdade sobre o que aconteceu com Elizabeth, a filha mais nova que desapareceu. Mantive a história totalmente realista, sem elementos sobrenaturais ou fantásticos, focando nos temas de segredos familiares, ética médica histórica e o processo de descoberta acadêmica. A narrativa é ambientada em locais específicos do Zeoam, Massachusetts, Salem, uma cidade fictícia chamada Harborville, com detalhes culturais e históricos precisos da época da Grande Depressão. A história termina com um fechamento emocional e ético, a restauração da memória de Elizabeth e outras vítimas semelhantes, refletindo como a pesquisa histórica pode trazer justiça e cura mesmo décadas após os eventos.